welcome to On The Air, GPA Scotland's new webcast service. It's Tuesday, 17th of May, and we are now broadcasting live until 7 o'clock. I'm Jeff Diack, I'm hosting tonight's show, and joining me on the panel to discuss our topic are a national organisation in Scotland working for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex equality. Over the past 6 months, Jack has been working on a project on LGBTI hate crime in Scotland, funded by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, including providing training for 91 police officers who will now become LGBT liaison officers. Moving further to my left, PC Simon Daly. Simon has been a police officer for 26 years. In 1995, he became an LGBT liaison officer working at Gayfield Square in Edinburgh. Since the inception of Police Scotland, Simon has been working with the National Safer Communities Department, holding the National LGBTP portfolio for service delivery with oversight of policy and strategy. Simon is a firm believer in equality and the responsibility of everyone to help work toward a fairer and more equal society for all. And finally, on the panel tonight, Ruth McQuaid. Ruth is a law graduate from Glasgow University and has spent 25 years with the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service. Ruth has held a number of roles, including District PF for Stirling and Alloa, Area Procurator Fiscal for Dumfries and Galloway, Deputy Procurator Fiscal for North Scotland, and currently is the Procurator Fiscal for the Sheriffdom of South Strathclyde. What a mouthful. And Dumfries and Galloway, with responsibility for all criminal prosecutions taking place in Sheriff Courts across Lanarkshire and Dumfries and Galloway. Ruth was appointed National Equality and Victims Champion for the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service in 2011 and combines this role with operational responsibilities as a prosecutor. Ruth led the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service to produce on a number of teaching materials in partnership with North Lanarkshire Local Authority on hate crime, including Them and Us and Just a Laugh, which are available on the intolerance.scot website. So, as today marks International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia, the topic for this webcast is hate crime. Now, in the lead up to this broadcast, we have asked you to submit questions and comments about hate crime, which I'll put to the panel tonight. You can join in the conversation and the discussion via social media as we're on air. Use the hashtag GPAOnTheAir or leave comments underneath the video on the Facebook page. Our team of GPA volunteers will be monitoring social media during the show, so if you have a question or a comment, use the hashtag on Facebook or on Twitter, and time permitting, we'll get your questions on and set to some of the panel. Now, in the video intro, we highlighted that the ILGA Europe published their annual Rainbow Europe Index last week, and Scotland scored an impressive 90% in terms of legislation and policy regarding the human rights of LGBTI people. So, obviously, we're in 2016, clearly a lot of progress has been made in terms of LGBT rights. So why do we still then have a problem when it comes to LGBTI people being the victim of hate crime, and are people sufficiently aware of the legislation and services available to them? Jack?
I think that we have a huge amount to be proud of in Scotland and across the UK as a whole. I was in Brussels in December at an ILGA Europe event actually with lots of delegates from other EU nations or European nations, and one of the things that struck me at that was how lucky we are in the UK compared with some other nations where there's no legal protection for LGBT people, never mind LGBTI people. So we're dead lucky, but we still have a long way to go in terms of, especially with hate crime, with transgender people's rights, making trans people feel safer, encouraging them to report hate crimes, supporting them through that process. There are lots of reasons why trans folk won't even report a hate crime, and we haven't even really scratched the surface on intersex rights, which we are just starting to do at the Equality Network just now. But
so how can we do that? How can we make that better?
I think in terms of intersex people, do you mean?
Yes.
By doing what we're doing just now, which is talking to them, but also more importantly listening to them and asking them what we want, because there's very little work being done with the intersex community, if I can use that word. Community is always a bit of a weird word to use, but with intersex people as a whole, there's very little work being done. Folk haven't really been asked what their experiences have been, so we need to really talk to them and listen to them. And we're doing that just now at the Equality Network. We've had a series of intersex forums, or fora, depending on what your grammar pedantics are, and we are currently kind of gathering the results of that, trying to figure out what it means. But I think the main thing is to not make decisions for a group. We have to talk to folk, listen to them, and then think about how we can help support that community.
Okay. Simon, in terms of what the police are doing for people who are LGBTI, what are the police doing to make that experience of reporting a hate crime better or more bearable?
I think first of all, we'd always like to encourage more people to come forward and report hate crime to us in all its guises. But for LGBT people and for intersex people, we need them to come forward and tell us of their experiences so that we can make it better. To do that, they obviously have some hurdles to overcome, and we need to try and make that as easy for them as possible. And one of the ways that we've done it, we've been working with Jack and the Equality Network to set up a network of officers who are now LGBT liaison officers, who people can request to speak to in particular, that they will make as many concessions as they can to make it easy for people to report things, whether they want to meet somewhere neutral. If they don't want to come to a police station, for example, it can be quite daunting to turn up at a police station or a police office. And the thought of having to stand at a public counter somewhere and potentially out yourself to someone. So we can arrange to meet somewhere neutral. We can go and visit them at home or somewhere else, if that helps.
Okay, so how accessible are these liaison officers? How easy are they to deal with? Is it purely through the one-on-one reporting service? Obviously, we're in a day and age where there are less public counters than there were. So obviously that reduces the availability of counters where you can just turn up. So how easy is it for someone to access these liaison officers?
Obviously, we would encourage people to phone us in the first instance if that's what's easiest for them. But we have services for online reporting. People can report directly online to us. They might want to use a third-party reporting service where there's other people who will help support them to report things to us in the first instance.
So explain a little bit more in terms of third-party reporting services.
So third-party reporting centres, if you like, there's about 300 of them across Scotland, where people can go and access help, whether it's, and the easy one to say is if they have language difficulties or they require someone to interpret on their behalf. But someone will help them make a report to the police. Sometimes they might want to do that anonymously, and we would still want to know, for intelligence purposes, we would always want to know what's going on, even if they don't particularly want to see the police in that instance. But these are people who can help them through the process and make them feel more comfortable about making that report, and also to help signpost them to where they can seek other services and assistance afterwards. So the police will take the report and we will investigate the crime, but we rely on our partner agencies to help people to move forward after such a thing.
To collate the information and I guess establish what it is that people want, how that process can be made better.
Yes, yes.
And the final stage, I guess, in any hate crime incident, Ruth, is court.
Yes.
Which is, I think I can speak for an awful lot of people saying, a terrifying experience, without there being the added pressure of having to discuss the most private of details, your sexuality, for example, in an open courtroom. It's the most open forum there is. So how is that? Yeah. How are cops making that process easier or better?
Well, I understand that they're to protect them, but absolutely yes, we understand that some of the issues and the barriers where you're holding back people from reporting is that fear of their sexual orientation being disclosed, particularly if they haven't come out and they haven't told anyone and it ends up in the papers. So we'd like to think that we're sensitive to that. While we have these robust policies, we should be sensitive to their wishes and how we proceed. So court isn't always the answer, and from listening to the communities, we understand from them they don't always want people to be prosecuted. They'd like us to take other courses of action. So people don't always understand that as prosecutors, that's not the only choice available to us. And reversion, which is something that we look at in certain instances where the local authorities have that programme available, which can address the behaviour of the individual, which means that the victim doesn't require fixed penalty instead. And we would like to be sensitive to those needs where we can, because we do appreciate how daunting it can be for people.
I struggle maybe a little bit with the. Surely, if something is serious enough to be considered a hate crime in terms of, someone's sexuality, how can that be dealt with by fixed penalty and be not seen to be, or be seen to be taken seriously?
Certainly, our initial response would be to prosecute, but if someone doesn't want to go down that route, then we will look at other methods for them. For some members of the community, fixed penalty may not be the approach they would like to see, but they would like to see the behaviour addressed. So diversion is one method which has been suggested to us. Programmes available for tackling sectarian behaviour, for example, so where that is suitable and where we feel that the offender would benefit from that and would learn from that, we will also consider that too. So it's not the only option. So when people report matters to the police, they shouldn't think that automatically means that they would require to go to court.
Okay.
That's but one option.
In an instance where something can't be dealt with by means of fixed penalty, if it is going to court, how would yourselves in the Crown Office, in the Fiscal Service, deal with or liaise with go to court? No. There are no other options. Do you, there's a brilliant victim support service that we have in Scottish courts. Are they equipped in dealing with LGBTI people for dealing with how different their experience might be in a court?
But the decision is taken to take the matters to court, and that will be with us being fully aware of the wishes of the victim. Then it is important to support them through that process, and we have a victim information and advice service which is there to support victims of particular categories of crime who we think particularly need support, and hate crime is one of those categories. So they will, the staff there will speak to them about what special measures can be made available to perhaps screen them from the offender, so that they don't have to see them, or to give their evidence over a TV link. That's two methods of support which are available. They can also have somebody sitting with them in court to support them as well. So they're the various methods which are there, and they can also signpost them to other support services which might be helpful to them. And we don't have a counselling service ourselves, but we can signpost victims to a service which would meet their needs on those occasions.
Okay, so don't forget, if you want to join in this discussion or this debate, you can leave comments on the Facebook page or use the hashtag GPA on the air. Things have changed a lot in the last few years in terms of how visible particularly transgender people are. I think, it's 18 years since the character Hayley first appeared in Coronation Street, for example, and I remember at the time I was very young, and there was uproar about it. This is so, oh my, this is such a strange thing, but not now. Do you think now, we're nearly 20 years down the line, people are more aware, more accepting? What sort of effect do you think that has on hate crime in general? Do you think that it makes people an easier target because, in general, members of the public are more accepting, or do you think that it makes people more aware of who transgender people are and open and accepting?
I think that's probably to answer. I'm not a transgender person. I don't want to speak for a community that I'm not a part of. But I personally am glad about how far we've come on transgender rights. I remember when I was a kid, there was a transgender woman where I lived in the town, and I remember, it was the talk of the town. It was a big town as well, but everyone talked about this trans woman in not very nice ways either. And I feel like we've moved past that kind of stage. But I also know, I've experienced a horrible hate crime, and so for trans people, life is still not a breeze. They still experience horrible things every time they go to their house, particularly if they're visibly trans, if they're at the start of a transition process. So I think because hate crime legislation exists for a reason, and the reason is that it's needed because people do target LGBTI people. So we've come a long way, but we're absolutely nowhere near the finish line.
There's still further to go. In terms of, Ruth, we've already spoken about the process of reporting an incident to the police, to dealing with something through the Fiscal Service and means of disposal, if you like. Progressive laws and policies, they obviously are in place. Things are getting better, but what do we still need to do, looking at the longer term, rather than just dealing with things incident by incident?
For me, the big thing is in terms of educating people. And it's all very well having laws and it's all very well having policies, but if people don't know that they exist, then it's not helpful to anyone. I think the last LGBT youth survey indicated that about half of the young people who were surveyed didn't really understand what their rights were. That has been a big issue for us over the last 4 years, and probably a priority in terms of our outreaches with the LGBTI community, is in educating particularly young people who are part of that community, and understanding that this is a crime which is happening to them, they're the victim of a crime, and that they should report it, and that will be taken seriously by the authorities. But also for those who are offending, to understand that they are crossing the line into criminal behaviour and the risk they put to themselves from doing that. So as a result, we have invested in a number of teaching resources over the last few years. The one dealing mostly with LGBTI hate crime was the Just a Laugh materials that we produced with North Lanarkshire Council.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, it was a short film which was created with school children from 4 different schools in Lanarkshire, 2 schools in Bellshill and 2 schools in Coatbridge. We produced a short film which highlighted the different ways in which young people could commit a hate crime, concentrating particularly on social media, so it's over their phones, over Facebook or whatever, things maybe they didn't understand. And
it's far too easy to be a social media warrior and say things without really thinking about the consequences.
Absolutely, and that is a big issue for young people who perhaps didn't realise they were committing a crime, and also for the young people who were being subjected to this behaviour, that they were being subjected to a crime. So we had a short film, the young pupils themselves, they acted it out, they were involved in the script, and along with that it was really important for us to have a set of teaching materials so that this became an off-the-shelf teaching resource, and it's got about I think 5-6 different lessons available with it that teachers can take off the shelf and teach secondary school pupils for, and we've now linked those materials in with some teaching materials disability hate crime as well, so produced with the I Am Me group. So it's getting talked about more. We've got it on a website, www.intolerance.scot, so available not only to teachers but to the wider public, and we're starting to make it known to other partner agencies abroad as well that these materials are here. And the hope at the end of the day is if you educate the young people and get them to understand what their rights are and also what the law is, that the offenders will stop crossing the line. We'll start to realise that that behaviour is not acceptable, and they'll suffer the consequences of that, which in some ways will hopefully reduce the persecution which people from the LGBTI community are facing.
Can I just also pick up on just something that you touched on just briefly there, is that also that when you asked about progress that we've made, we talk about the LGBTI community like it's a homogenous group, but actually there are communities within that community, and so there are disabled people within that community, which is what you touched on there, and there are BME groups as well, and we know that if you're a disabled person who's also LGBTI, you're more likely to experience discrimination, for example. So there's, like, when we talk about progress, it's great we're making some progress kind of in a bigger picture way, but there are little pockets of things where we've still got a long way to go in terms of working with communities.
In that case, where, in your opinion, are the gaps or the stumbling blocks in the progress that's being made?
I think that there are gaps in that we're not addressing intersectional issues necessarily now that we need to, and that's not. I don't have an easy answer for how to do that because it is complicated.
Do you think that's because people just don't understand what they are?
Yes, and even the word intersectional is a bit of a confusing word. Like it's an academic word, so even the language around it is a bit clunky and a bit kind of unwieldy sometimes. But we're not really addressing the fact that if you are a refugee living in a bit of Glasgow who came here because you're a lesbian and you're a part of a community that doesn't really accept your sexual orientation. We're not addressing, those things are so nuanced, and it's just about, I don't know, taking the time and trying to address them, and even just being aware is a start. And we're not always aware. We talk about LGBTI people, and I think people in their head get a picture of middle class white folk down the gay bar jumping in the air because they've got equal marriage, and actually it's more complex than that.
Yeah. People do.
And nothing against folks jumping in the air about equal marriage.
You're right though. People do envisage a stereotype, and I guess that's something else that we need to get rid of is stereotypes. How do we do that, Simon?
Yes, Simon.
I think, I'd love to know. And I like the way that you gave me the most difficult question. I think that it's all about education. You're right, we have made progress. We certainly can't be complacent. That I think that, going back to your what you're saying about someone being on the television, the first trans person, I remember the big fuss in the newspapers about the first lesbian kiss on Brookside or whatever. And this lasted for days in the newspapers, and now it's commonplace on the TV.
I'm not the world's biggest Corey fan, but the same thing happened a few years later with the first gay kiss on television when I think it was Todd and I can't remember who was in it.
You ran away to Manchester,
but it was,
didn't you?
it was a massive thing. Everyone talked about it. Like it was, and a lot of people in very disrespectful ways. And the language that was used, I'm not watching a pair of poof sat it on the telly and stuff. It's nearly 15, 20 years ago that happened. But those were easy comments for people to make, but really hurtful for the people who were in those groups concerned. I think we've probably moved quite a bit down the line from there. There are far more gay characters in telly than there were then. So we have moved on, but I think there's still issues there when people, and I think you're right as well, a lot of these problems would come down to education. People don't realise that what they're saying or what they're doing can be so hurtful.
It's an education thing, absolutely. And if you compare it with, I suppose, the racial hate crime, if you think what was on the television 30 years ago in terms of programmes like Love Thy Neighbour and what language was acceptable, and we have become educated as a society to understand that such language is offensive and the hurt that it causes to people. If you think about smoking, we've been educated over the years about the harmful effect that has, and also secondary smoking on people. So for me, when I think about hate crime and I'm speaking to young people, hate crime in a way pollutes the air in the same way, and you don't always realise the effect that it's having on individuals, and it's about having that same education programme for hate crime as we have for things like smoking, so that people actually understand. Because as the title of our teaching products, where it was just a laugh, and the boy in it saying, to me it was just a laugh, and he didn't realise the impact, not only for the victim, but also for himself and the trouble he found himself in as a result of that. And so you would hope that in terms of all of these big social issues, that it will come from the next generation getting that understanding. Then they'll challenge us who are getting a little bit older in terms of what's right and what's wrong, and that's always a continuing thing.
You spoke about Love Thy Neighbour. I've never seen it. It's banned from TV now. It's not one of these programmes that pops up on UK Gold, but I've heard people of my parents' generation talking about it and how bad it was, but at the time they just thought that was acceptable. Can we foresee a day when, maybe in 20 or 30 years' time, where people then will look at comments that are made about LGBT people now and think, wow, how was that ever acceptable? Do you foresee a world where people are so accepting of one another? Is that something we can achieve?
Well, that's what we'd like to achieve. I mean, I think that's the ambition. And when I became an equality champion, I went in to speak to the Lord Advocate about what we wanted to achieve within the Crown Office and Procurator's Fiscal Service over the next few years. And he was quite simple in what he wanted to achieve. He wanted to eradicate bigotry, and I thought, wow, well, that's your aspiration. That's a big one for us to achieve, but, I think we've really got to go for that and see if that can be eradicated. That people who have experienced it may think, well, things will never change. What we've seen in many other ways in society, partly through the introduction of legislation, but partly through the challenging towards people's attitudes in society, that things can change. The impact has been over the years in terms of smoking, in terms of drink driving, and we're getting there. It's a long journey, but that's our hope and aspiration.
I think I'm hopeful too.
Yeah, well, I kind of feel, when you were talking there, I was thinking about some of the comments that have been made by people in my life about LGBTI people, that since I came out, nobody speaks like that anymore.
No.
Certainly not in front of me. They might do, and I think that maybe the more folk are out, the more folk are visible, and unashamedly so, and quite, I don't really always like the word proud, because I'm not really proud to be gay. I didn't achieve it. It just happened.
Yeah.
but I'm not ashamed of it either. And I think the more folk are out and
it's really, I don't
unapologetic,
mean to,
that's... Sorry.
Yes, I don't mean to...
Um,
there was the It Gets Better campaign a couple of years ago, and I think, certainly speaking from personal experience, it's a very, very difficult thing to come to terms with by yourself. When you've actually done it, a lot of the time, you've been worrying about absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Because people are accepting, people do care, that it's not a problem for people now.
Yeah.
So...
And I think also, even if it is a problem for them, I think being confronted by somebody who they care about, who is in that group, challenges their perceptions or their assumptions. And I think we saw recently the Scottish Labour Party leader, Kezia Dugdale, said that she's got a female partner.
And nobody's really batted an eyelid.
Nobody. It was nothing. It was like, all right, okay, cool. You've got a female partner. And I think they've come that far. I think the more folk who come out, the further we're going to go. And it is going to become like, there's folk who wouldn't say homophobic things, for example, to my parents now, because they know that they've got a gay daughter. So I think the more folk are out, not to put pressure on folk to come out, but I think the more folk who are out, the easier it's going to get in the long run. And that is part of education. That's about telling folk that gay folk aren't others, they're the people in your life, or they might even be you.
Yeah, a person. And not just an object you can talk about.
Yeah.
Can I say, I think that we need to be mindful that life for an 18-year-old gay man living in the centre of Glasgow is very different from an 18-year-old gay man living in Wick, for example. But
or
also for or an 80-year-old. I don't know how many 80-year-old trans people there would be living in Scotland, but they will be there, and it's their life experience takes them to somewhere else, and how they view hate crime. And what always concerns me is how many of them have been accepting of the fact that they are abused on a daily basis, and don't consider that hate crime.
So what would you then, in that case, what would you encourage, a person, in this fictional person that we've created, what would you encourage that person to do? Because obviously they need to learn from previous experience and to be able to move on. We need to listen to their previous experience. So how can people, if someone's just thought, sitting here watching this thinking, wow, things have changed 100-fold in the last 20 years, but I could be part of something that makes that a little bit better. I've been bullied or picked on or a victim of a hate crime for this. What can that person do to leave a legacy, if you like, for the next generation?
Well, we've been speaking about education, and that there is a generational change thing going on, and we are evolving as a society. But we're not there yet, and what we need to deal with is the here and now for people. We can't just wait for that naturally for the education to filter through and things to get better. So I have to get better for them now, and to help that to happen, they have to speak to us, for one example, where we can help them to seek assistance from other groups, for our partner agencies, who will be there to support them. And if the legal route is the right way for them to go, then that's what should be happening. Whether we need to liaise with housing associations, whether it needs to be... I have this fear that there are older gay men and lesbian women in care homes who can't be themselves, who can't be out to the staff for fear of what that might mean. And I hate to think that they are living that kind of life, and we need to be out there challenging people to make sure that they can live as they should.
It was a number of years ago now, I was on a night out in Glasgow, and I bumped into this guy who was in a club who said he was 69 years old, and he was out and proud and loving life because it wasn't like it was in his childhood. So obviously there's a 40, 50 years, maybe not childhood, adolescenthood maybe, if you like, or early teenage years would be better. He was so impressed with the way things had changed. So, clearly history says that things have changed and they are better. But we need to keep on top of the progress we're making. You're right, and not become complacent. If we have a person who is a victim of a crime and is worried about telling the police, what would you say to that person?
Come forward and tell us that. Forget about what you've heard from other people and things. We've made mistakes in the past, and I'm really sorry that people have had a bad experience with the police, whether it's Police Scotland or their own local forces when it was.
Yeah, that's fine to say that, you know, for you to say you are the liaison officer. There are another 91 officers up and down the country. Is every police officer so sympathetic?
No. I wish they were, and we're working towards that, but I have to be honest and tell you that we have homophobes and racists in the police. That we have over 20,000 staff. Of course, it would be unrealistic to expect that we don't have.
Was perfect.
Yeah, but we're working towards it, and this is something. And what people have to understand is that there is a very robust complaints. You'll know as well as I do that there is a very robust complaints process where officers will be taken to task, and if we can't help them to change their attitudes, then we don't have a job for them. That's how it has to be.
So what we're saying is that it's very unlikely that you would encounter any of those issues in reporting an incident to the police, and if you do, then there is a backup service there.
Yes,
you don't have to be subject to that.
No.
Also, just to remind folk that there are third-party reporting centres, because it can be scary. Like most folks' perception of the police, no offence, not you, you're
Thank
lovely,
you.
but it's negative, and it's not because the police are all bad actually necessarily. It's because you'd go to the police when something bad has happened, so it's a negative thing. But there are third-party reporting centres. There's the online reporting form if you don't really want to talk to somebody, and there's victim support. There's other agencies. So I would, if someone doesn't necessarily want to walk into a police station, I understand that, but I would encourage folk to try and get some support. Even if it's talking to a pal, like just try and get some support, because it can become very, the drip effect of hate crime on an ongoing basis can be very diminishing. So I would encourage folk to at least talk to their pals.
And there's a big issue of trust. They absolutely have to trust ourselves and the police with the information that they give us, and that has been a challenge for us over the years to grow that trust, and that's about us them being able to feel that we understand the issues and that we will be sensitive in the way that we treat them, and I hope that we have been. It was actually a big thing for us as an organisation to join Stonewall's Diversity Champion programme, because that was one way to try and send a message out to the LGBTI community that we took the matter seriously, and in terms of the training of our own staff. Because how we treat our own staff and how we treat such issues is a measure for them of how much they can trust us when they come to us with such a report. Because if we don't have the training, we don't have the understanding, then we might not deal appropriately with the report that they send to us. So that's but one way you can try and build that, and over time that you hope then that they have the confidence to come forward and to testify, in the same way that you've had issues with people for other crimes as well who haven't got that confidence and need that support to come forward and speak out.
Okay. Moving on, we're almost out of time. If you want to take part in the discussion, then you can do. Use the hashtag GPA on the air on Facebook or Twitter, or leave comments under the video. The video will remain on Facebook for you to watch forever and ever. However, for the moment, we only have about 5 or 10 minutes left, so if you do have a question, please ask it now, or we will run out of time. So, summing up what we've chatted about tonight, we've made a lot of progress, but we can't become complacent, is I think, a fairly shared view between us all. Do you have any other comments that you'd like to make on how things are going forward?
Yeah, I had something to say when Ruth was talking, but I forgot because I got into what she was saying. Go to Simon first and come back to me.
Simon.
Can I say a wee bit about how I think society changes? And this is Simon speaking, as well as Simon, who happens to be a police officer. Sometimes it's about seeing each other as human beings, and about forgetting what's different about us, and seeing what we have in common. That that we are all essentially the same. We may love different people. That part is a separate entity. The rest of it we have in common. We all eat, sleep, whatever else it is we do. And I think that when people get a chance to be around each other and there's an interaction, then we start to see each other as equals and as human beings, as other people. And I think that when people distance themselves, then there's an issue. And that's the same for police officers.
Yeah.
We need to be reaching out to the community, but we need the community to come and speak to us too. And so it has to be a two-way street. There has to be a dialogue. And when we're getting things wrong, please come and tell us. We can try and make it better.
Maybe a little bit off topic then, but how did the police then shake off that opinion that people have. They're the guys that give me tickets for speeding.
Yeah.
But they're the guys who will be the first to phone if something goes wrong in my life. I mean, that is people's perception of the police. Horrible people that give you tickets. But I'll phone them if something's wrong. How does a modern police service shake off that image?
Yeah, exactly.
I appreciate you're not the Chief Constable.
No, I'm not.
This is a big question, and we only have a few minutes left.
Can I answer? Because that actually comes back to my point that I was thinking of when we were talking, which was one of the things that was great about. So Simon and I went on this little tour of Scotland, which was cool, and we trained all these police officers to be LGBTI friendly, or friendlier, because some of them were already friendly, and to support them really, to support the LGBTI community when they made reports of hate crimes. And one of the things that I found interesting was in the first one we did was at Fetties, and interestingly, one of the police officers came up to me, and she was a trainer. I can't really remember anything about her because I was so nervous, right? Walking into a room full of police officers. I'm from a mining community. We do not like the police. But I was so nervous. But she came up and she said that one of the things I love about training is that you learn something every time you do a training session. And I didn't really know what she meant until maybe the third or fourth thing that we did. And what I learned was that there are people inside those uniforms. And I hadn't quite... I sort of realised that, but the police, you see the police that are kind of, it's like traffic wardens. I don't even have a car, but I get nervous when I see one. They're kind of, you see the uniform, but actually there are people in those uniforms who've got life experiences, and I think it was the second thing we did in this station at Dalmarnock, where I could overhear a group working, because we did kind of interactive stuff, and somebody was talking very knowledgeably about transgender issues, and I thought, oh, maybe that person was transgender, and it turned out the person wasn't, but their cousin was, and I was like, oh, okay, he knows a trans person. It was good for me to realise that the police are more open-minded, maybe sometimes than you think they might be. So, and if you get a bad one, ask for another one. So that was useful. And then that's when I realised what that woman meant, when she said, you learn something as a trainer. Because I learned that police officers are people. Who knew?
Who knew, Simon?
I think, well, yeah. It's a surprise to me too, but I think it's important that police officers have to recognise that that's how we are seen. We have to know what the public think about us, but we also have to make an effort to go out and give them an opportunity to speak to us when we're not handing out tickets. If the only time you ever speak to the police is when you've committed a crime or a road traffic offence or you're a victim of crime, then all you see is this officious person who's got a job. There's a reason.
You throw away
no, not at all.
Well, that should protect in the wider public.
Yeah, exactly. And to reach out and do more, and certainly from a local policing point of view, that certainly Police Scotland is taking that very seriously, moving forward with a new community engagement strategy where we're going to go, in some respects, we would maybe know it as going back to basics, as going out and taking the time to go and speak to people. We're in credibility, it's becoming more difficult, but we need to go out and work with the community, so that's what we're going to do.
One thing we found very helpful internally was we introduced a reverse mentoring programme where some of our own staff, our LGBT staff, they mentored more senior people in our organisation. One mentored the chief executive, and that was a way of everyone in the organisation getting to understand better the issues of their own staff, and whether to prosecute or not. So you really got to understand and get to know the community. So we sort of did the work internally as well as doing the outreach work externally as well. So it's about the issue of doing both at the one time. But as you mentioned earlier, nobody can be complacent. There's still plenty for all of us to learn. I was at an event down in Manchester not that long ago with you, Jack, as well. I think we were talking about hate crime, and somebody mentioned nobody's really talked about the bisexual community, and I said, that's quite right. It's not been an issue which has been properly addressed. So there's still plenty for us to do, and we're challenged every day to, I think, for everyone to learn something new, because everyone's got their own assumptions and we have their own biases, and it's for overcoming them.
Okay, that's just about it. I'd like to thank you all for coming along tonight. Jack Kelly, Simon Daly, Ruth Gray, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it, and don't forget, if you've been a victim of a hate incident or crime, do report it, or by dialing 101. Of course, if it's an emergency, 999, nothing else will do. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.